After yet another torrid week for the party that governs Scotland, Scottish Labour's deputy leader Jackie Baillie is calling for Nicola Sturgeon's membership of the SNP to be suspended. The Sunday Times Scotland says this morning the party's elected representatives are turning against their former leader, accusing her of leaving behind a shambles for her successor, Humza Yousaf. Well, let's speak to John Boothman, who is Sunday Times political correspondent in Scotland. Morning, John.
Good morning, Chloe.
This is all looking a bit of a mess, isn't it? And, you know, when Nicola Sturgeon was in power, it looked like everything was united, everything was going well. And slowly, it seems like the mask is slipping.
It's exactly 2 months today since she resigned, and what a 2 months it's been. You can't wake up in the morning in Scotland and pick up a newspaper without seeing a poor headline for the SNP. And I think even amongst, our staunchest supporters, they're starting to have some doubts. I think these images of the blue tent in the garden, the camper van last week, they prompted huge doubts among people. Exactly a month ago, you'll remember the party president, Mike Russell, said the party was in a terrible mess. And at the time, we all thought, well, what does he mean? And the events of the last month have proved what a terrible mess it is. I think it's fair to say there's still quite a lot of denial amongst the SNP's parliamentarians. They met Humza Yousaf, the new leader, on Friday, but many of them now in a place where they don't quite believe what they're not quite believing what they've seen, and having some doubts about Nicola Sturgeon and the reign that she had over the SNP, but also that might damage her future prospects in terms of what she might want to do. She's got to come back to Holyrood, to the Scottish Parliament this week, and there's going to be a lot more developments in the story.
How loud are those calls from within the SNP about Nicola Sturgeon, questioning her, what she did for the party, her legacy? Is it a small number or is it a lot of people?
It's probably a small number, because a lot of them are still bemused and confused and shocked, even though it's 2 months ago since she left. They'd rather put it behind them. They've got big challenges ahead. One MSP said to me yesterday at that meeting on Friday, there were great big elephants in the room that people really didn't want to talk about. But, you wake up this morning and you look at the newspapers and you see the party leader, Humza Yousaf, denying that the party's on the verge of bankruptcy. Her own story in the Sunday Times that the party itself is running out of cash because of that exodus of members. And the guy who's saying it is Colin Beattie, who's the party treasurer, a kind of slightly unknown figure. But this guy's been the treasurer of the SNP for 18 years, bar 6 months. So this is very, very serious times. That crisis and challenge that Mike Russell referred to a month ago, the party yesterday agreed to bring in forensic accountants to look at the accounts. They passed a motion, saying that in reality the entire governance of the party is utterly dysfunctional. It's a huge crisis. The party has no auditors. We've seen that story. They might not even be able to file their annual accounts in time for July with the Electoral Commission. And that's before you start to look at anything they're doing on the policy front and any of the political challenges they face.
They have ordered a review, haven't they? A review of transparency, the way the party is managed. That is expected, I think, to report with an interim report in June. Is that right?
Yeah, but it's how extensive that report's going to be. It's looking at the entire governance of the party. It's talking about, as I said, forensic accountants so they can find out what's happening about the money. This just isn't a simple exercise when you take a quick look at the structure of the party and the books. This is something that really is going to go in deep detail into the party. They're bringing in external people as well as senior figures in the party. I think Ian Blackford, who you may be speaking to later, and Jean Freeman, the former health secretary, are involved in this. This is a big, big thing because, as Mike Russell said a month ago, the party is in a terrible mess and it faces its biggest crisis and challenge in 50 years. And we now know what he meant.
One of the criticisms sometimes levelled at journalists when we cover political stories is it's all in the bubble. It's in the political bubble. I'm wondering how much cut-through is this making with not just SNP voters, but voters across Scotland?
I think I started off this interview talking about the images of that lieutenant in the garden and the camper van. It's clearly the case. You don't have to travel far anywhere in Scotland to hear people talking about this. This is something that is cutting through with the party. I think with the public, I think there's some evidence of that when you look at what's happening in the polls, the suggestions that independent support is holding up, but on the other hand, support for the SNP is going backwards. I mean, Labour are really buoyant about the reception that they're getting in the streets, for example, in Rutherglen, where there might be that by-election coming up. I think it's fair to say, although some people in the SNP will deny this, that these things have cut through. When Nicola Sturgeon's been the dominant figure in Scottish politics, really, from 2007 and then as First Minister from 2014, when she goes and when in 2 months you've had such a shambles, I don't think it can help cut through with the public.
And so where does all this leave Humza Yousaf?
In a very difficult position. I think it was widely recognised that when he was elected that this was a very narrow victory that he had. I think it's also been recognised even before he was elected that he was going to be not as good, not as effective as Alex Salmond or Nicola Sturgeon before him. He's facing huge challenges going forward. There's a thing coming up in the Parliament tomorrow. The consultation ends over a thing called the highly protected marine areas, where the pact with the Greens that the SNP have means that 10% of Scottish waters should in effect be rewilded, taken out of use for the renewables industry, for fishing, for some leisure activities. It's a huge issue and it sparked a great deal of controversy in the Highlands and Islands in particular. And at that meeting on Friday, some of the SNP's rural MPs were worried that they would survive at the general election if this went through. That's just one of a huge number of issues in his entry. The whole issue of gender recognition comes back this week, and that Section 35 order that he wants to challenge in court. And that's the thing, remember, that caused the biggest division within the SNP in the Scottish Parliament since 2007.
John, good to speak to you as ever. Thank you.